I'm Mitch Ladd,
And I'm Matt Stevens.
and this is Comic Sans Drinks. So, we are recording this on the next to last day of Black History Month. So, by the time you listen to this, it will no longer be Black History Month. However, we thought that it was a good idea to still honor Black History Month, I guess, with this month's selections. So tonight we are reading March Book 1. I'll talk about it more here in a second. And then also we are drinking a couple of wines from a Black-owned winery.
Yep.
So before we really talk about March, I want, Matt, what's like your very spoiler-free, like, quick reaction to this book?
This is a great dive into a historical movement and historical events that I knew something about, but didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did about. You get to know characters, players, important people, details on events that you kind of had a general understanding of, all like kind of juxtaposed with the inauguration of Barack Obama.
And I really, really liked how it was framed that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's told in a very like conversational tone. It almost feels like you are, one of the kids who are listening to John Lewis talk about his life and everything. We only read the first book. I wish we had read all three for this.
I mean, I 100% got all three from the library, and it was very hard for me to not continue because I didn't want to ruin what we're going to talk about with having more information from book 2 and book 3. But this weekend, 100%, I'm finishing book 2 and book 3 to get the whole thing.
Yeah. And, especially assuming that books 2 and 3 are as quick of a read as this one is. Like, it's a little over 120 pages, and you can fly through it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so we are reading March Book 1. It tells the story of the early days of late Congressman John Lewis, from his time as a child up to 1960, when he, along with other young people, were conducting sit-ins for the right for black people to sit at the same lunch counters as white people. March, co-written by Lewis and Andrew Aydin, with art by Nate Powell, is the first of 3 graphic novels telling Lewis's life story during the Civil Rights Movement. There is also a sequel to March called Run that chronicles Lewis's life after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So that said, we are starting with the white wine. We have a bottle of white, bottle of red. I went to, so what we're drinking, it's from Love Corkscrew. You can put the emphasis on any of those words however you like. So this was actually, like, when we were trying to find something to pair this book with, I did some research. We were trying to find like a black-owned brewery at first because beer is really more our speed, but nothing really happened. And then I was researching, black-owned wineries, and I found this brand, and I was like, I've seen that label before. And, we sell it at one of the Walmarts here in Springfield. So I went, and I couldn't decide what, what to get, so I just got one of each. We're going to talk more about wine in a second, but first, let's take a sip of this because I've been wanting to. This is a Niagara wine.
It says American White Table Wine.
American White Table Wine. It is supposed to be served chilled. So a Niagara wine. It's a like a light skinned hybrid grape variety. It's got a slight pear taste.
Okay.
Yeah. So, without further ado, let's try this. That is really good.
That's very sweet.
Yes. I am a sweet wine drinker myself. I try to, I've tried to have some of the drier wines, and it's one of those things where like I don't necessarily hate the experience, but I don't know if I actually like the wine or if I'm just trying to be an adult. It's probably more the latter. Matt, what kind of wine do you normally drink?
The drier the better, whether it's white or red. I want that pucker in the back of your mouth when you take a sip. You finish a glass and you're like, I almost feel like I need to drink a glass of water to pair with that glass of wine because it dries out your mouth. I am not a huge fan of the sweet wines, just never have been. But for this one being sweet, it is chilled. It's sweeter than I prefer, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah. If I had read ahead of time that Niagara wines tend to have kind of like a pearish flavor, I probably would have avoided this. And I don't know if I get like a heavy pear flavor from this, but it's definitely drinkable. I'm glad that I didn't read about the wine first.
Yeah, I mean, drinking it, I can kind of get that. It kind of does taste like biting into a pear, like a light, very light flavor. But yeah, kind of get that.
So before we talk in detail about March, book one, Matt, let's talk a little bit about the creative team.
So the creative team in this one is very different from anything that we've read or talked about thus far on Comic Sans Drinks. The two authors of this book, the first one is John Lewis. It was co-written by John Lewis, who's a former U.S. representative. He was a Georgian native, and he served 17 terms in Congress starting in 1987 until his death in 2020. In the early 60s, as we'll discuss with the book, he was active with SNCC and SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. If I could spit those words out, that would help. And participated in sit-ins in Nashville as well as freedom rides, where activists rode interstate buses into segregated southern states. In 2011, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and Lewis's autobiography, Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement, was co-written with Mike Dorso and won the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, the Ansfield Wolf Book Award, the Christopher Award, and the Lillian Smith Book Award.
Wow.
Also, while being selected a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. In 2013, he became the first member of Congress to pen a graphic novel, and it was co-written with Andrew Aydin and illustrated, like Mitch said, by Nate Powell. Not our typical comic book writer.
Definitely not.
Andrew Aydin also follows kind of that follows a similar path and not our standard comic book writers. He did co-wrote this #1 New York Times bestselling autobiographical novel trilogy. He began working with John Lewis in 2007 as an aide on Lewis's re-election campaign. There, he learned that the 1950s comic Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story is part of what inspired John Lewis. They had some discussions about their influence of comics on young readers, which led to the idea of writing a graphic novel. Lewis agreed on the sole condition that Aydin accepted the duties of being co-author.
So you see, kids, comic books change the world.
Yeah, I mean they do, because the Martin Luther King one changed John Lewis's life, which in turn changed Andrew Aydin's life, and to write this, which is, I mean, I think we've both known about this book for a very long time, and it was, again, one of those that had never made it onto our time to read this now list.
Oh yeah, I don't even remember when I bought it, because so when we were trying to come up with something for this month, I was looking everywhere for inspiration, and this one was on our short list. And then so I'm looking at my graphic novels that are on my bookshelf, and I'm like, oh, I already own this. I picked it up at a Half Price Books.
Oh.
So when I was on some trip,
Yep.
I clearly stopped in there. I was like, yes, I'm picking this up because it is something that I've wanted to read for a long time, and having it cheaper was better. But I still hadn't gotten around to it. But yeah, so when I saw that, I was like, we're doing this one because it's easy for me.
I think this is at least my second time checking it out of the library. I know that I've checked it out at least one previous time and did not make it before it was due back, and I was like, oh, I'll come back to it. Well, here we are. Nate Powell, who is the artist, is also a musician. He gained notoriety in 2008 when his graphic novel Swallow Me Whole won an Ignatz Award for Outstanding Debut and Outstanding Artist. That same book won an Eisner Award for Best Original Graphic Novel. Illustrating March garnered Powell a National Book Award in 2016, making him the first cartoonist to receive the award.
Really?
Yep. Powell had heard about the creation of this graphic novel and submitted his name for consideration. And then since March, Powell has done a couple of things. He has worked on Rick Riordan's The Heroes of Olympus, The Lost Hero, and his own book, Cover, and then is also working on a short comic collection called You Don't Say.
So yeah, definitely across the board, not creative teams that we've talked about before.
No, and not creative teams that are as prolific in the comic book industry as I think anything else that we've read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
without further ado, let's take a deep dive into March Book 1. Couple of notes beforehand. First off, I try to mention it every episode. If you haven't read this book, pause, read it, then come back. And while you're reading it, I don't know, maybe drink some Love Corkscrew wine. I don't know. But yeah, definitely come back and listen to this because this is definitely not one that you want to just hear about and never experience.
No.
Yeah. With this book, so my second note before we get started, this isn't like a more conventional graphic novel where it's broken up into chapters. I would say that it's probably broken up into two parts. Mm-hmm. I think that there was a very clear middle of the road.
Yeah.
So I did break this up into like 5 parts that I kind of felt were thematic. Some of these parts are longer than others, but I felt like some of these things kind of like went together and bled together. I mean, I honestly probably could have broken this up into like maybe 7 or 8 parts if I really wanted to, but I didn't want to. So, part 1. March begins on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on a march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. The marchers are met by troopers who throw tear gas at the crowd before attacking. This is what's commonly known as Bloody Sunday. There's way more history than I just gave you in those 2 sentences. The story then cuts to January 20th, 2009, the morning of Barack Obama's presidential inauguration. As John is getting ready for the historic day, he gets a missed call from a private number. Before we find out who that is, the book cuts to his office in Washington, D.C. Waiting for him in his office is his sister, Rosa. They are soon joined by a woman from Atlanta and her 2 sons. The family is in Washington for the inauguration, and she wanted to show her kids their history. John is all too happily to oblige and shows the kids around the office, showing them a picture of him with JFK, as well as one of Martin Luther King Jr. Giving his I Have a Dream speech. Also telling the kids how he was the 6th speaker that day. Then one of the boys asks him why he has so many chickens in his office, which brings us back to John's childhood. So, as I mentioned, some of these parts are longer than others. Part 1 for me, was very short. But, just those first couple of pages, what were your thoughts, like first diving into the story?
I know here and on The Geek Awakens, we talk a lot about comics that start off in the middle of an event. This is absolutely one of those. But at the same time, it's almost more like a prologue, in the fact that it kind of introduces you to where this is going to end up and like the important event that this is leading up to. But then it very quickly cuts back. Well, I say cuts back, but cuts forward to Obama's inauguration, and I really enjoy that it takes 2 very important American historical moments and just hits you in the face with them right off the bat, like just to let you know that like history repeats, history is important, like just comes at you full force with that. Although I think my favorite part of this first section is kind of the look on the kids' faces when they're in his office and he starts showing them the pictures.
Yeah. Speaking of the looks, like the look on the woman when she realizes that she is actually talking to John Lewis. Just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You weren't living in Springfield like during Obama's inauguration, were you?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. I was in the crowd when he first announced his presidency, and then also when he announced Joe Biden as his running mate. The first announcement, it was bitterly cold. The second announcement, it was probably triple digits. Like,
oh man,
yeah, it was some extremes. Yeah.
Wow.
I have busted myself with this story a few times. Have I told you my Barack Obama story?
Maybe.
Okay. I'm sure that most of the people listening to this has not heard this story. So, this was the summer after my freshman year of college.
Okay.
I was working part-time at Schlotsky's Deli downtown. And so I got off one day, and a friend of mine met me downtown, and we were just kind of like bumming around. We went to the record store, this and that. So we're going down this alley, and there is this guy that is getting his picture taken. He's in, a shirt and tie and everything, and he's the way he's posing, like, he's posing very cool.
Okay.
So we walk past and everything, and so I go to my friend, and I'm like, who is that? And my friend, her father was a lobbyist for state government, so she knew a lot of, the ins and outs and everything. And so she goes, oh, that's State Senator Barack Obama. I make fun of his name, and we keep walking. Yeah. And so that was in 2004. That was maybe 2 months before the DNC, where he gave that impassioned speech that like shot him to, the national spotlight and everything. And I made fun of his name.
Lesson learned.
Yeah. So, Barack, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. But anyway, going back to March, I could be like just completely like off on this, but how we went from Bloody Sunday and then cut straight to him waking up that morning in 2009. I kind of got the feeling that that was on his mind when he woke up that morning. Definitely a prologue, definitely kind of like dropping you off in the middle of a story, but like still like I felt like that was heavily on his mind, if not even that specific moment, but it had to have been, just his entire journey leading up to, the first black president of the United States.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being such crucial events in history.
Mm-hmm. So, moving on to part 2, which is another shorter part for me. So John grew up on a 100-acre farm where at a young age he was in charge of taking care of the chickens, to the point where he was able to tell them all apart and named them. But chicken tending wasn't his only love. At a young age, he wanted to become a preacher. Naturally, he began preaching to the chickens nightly. He would also hold funerals for chickens who died and attempted to baptize one, nearly killing it. Of course, he got so attached to the chickens that he would get upset if his parents bartered one of his chickens, or worse, killed one of them for their own meals. This part was equal parts touching and sad and all that kind of stuff. Especially, I don't know if this was done on purpose, and I don't know if this is accurate, but the bird so the chicken that he tried to baptize but then came back to life, that looked almost identical to the chicken that had its neck snapped.
Don't know if that was on purpose, but yeah.
But even if that's not how it really happened, that kind of imagery really kind of stuck with me, because you've got this moment where like the bird's life was saved only to be taken again. I can see that. I think I laughed out loud at the part where he was like giving sermons to the chickens.
Oh, I absolutely did.
And especially like where he's saying how the chickens like bowed their head and everything, but the almonds never came. But yeah, like early on, clearly you are setting yourself up for heartbreak by having a child take care of chickens that they're going to get attached to. But what were your thoughts?
I very much enjoyed this section, in part because, kind of like I said, that some basic facts about these historical events, but you don't have all the details. Like I knew who John Lewis was. I knew the name, but like no idea where he grew up, how he grew up. And even this brief glimpse into his childhood shows you kind of how he became the man that he was and why he did what he did and what he became famous for. So like they're chickens, but like the compassion that he shows for those chickens is the compassion and the empathy is obviously something that he carried with him his entire life. And it was really like, I thought that was cool to be able to see that in him as a child, to know that that's where that comes from as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, kind of piggyback off of what you said, like, I knew who John Lewis was, especially, like, that period of time from, like, 2004, I was 18, 19, finally learning, what the real world is like, up until about 2016, 2017. I was very tuned into politics. I don't know why I stopped paying attention as much as I did in 2016 or 2017. I can't pick it out. Yeah.
Don't know.
But yeah, so like I was very familiar with John Lewis. I knew that he was a figure of the civil rights movement. Did not know how integral he was. So learning that while reading this was really informational, I guess. So moving on, part 3. So John tells the boys about his first trip up north. At the age of 11, John's uncle Otis took him to Buffalo, New York. He talked about how, for the first leg of the trip, they had to pack their lunches, knowing they wouldn't be able to go into restaurants. He also spoke on how much planning it took to stop for gas and bathroom breaks. Otis knew which ones had colored bathrooms and which ones to drive past. John felt better once they got to Ohio, and was very excited once they got to Buffalo, saying the city was an otherworldly experience compared to his life on the farm. The two stayed at the home of another one of John's uncles in a neighborhood where black people lived right next door to white people. During the trip, his family took him to shops in a vibrant downtown where he first discovered what an escalator was. Once back home, it was time for him to go to school. Despite the conditions of the school bus, the roads, and even the school itself, which was still segregated, John loved going to school, especially the library. However, his parents kept him home during planting and harvesting seasons. John would protest and often hide in the mornings before sneaking onto the school bus. The Supreme Court decided on Brown versus Board of Education, which ended segregation in public schools during John's freshman year of high school. It was during this time that he also discovered a young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. and set out to find out as much as he could. Unfortunately, Brown versus Board of Education wasn't the end of racial issues. The murder of Emmett Till for speaking to a white woman, and the arrest of Rosa Parks for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white person, sparked protests and boycotts led by Dr. King, inspiring John to give his first public sermon 5 days before his 16th birthday. This was kind of a longer chunk, but I kind of felt like, him going to New York and seeing all these new experiences, I felt like that fed really well into, his schooling. So, what were your thoughts on this chunk?
This is another chunk that was just incredible information and background on who he was and the life that he experienced. And I think even, like I said, even if we know some of those basics of history and things that happened in and around that time, I think seeing the juxtaposition and the segregation and the division through his eyes as a kid is really enlightening. I grew up in a fairly mixed neighborhood racially, so I didn't really ever think anything about black people living next to white people. But when he talks about it and seeing how different it is from where he grew up or where he lived in Georgia to Buffalo, it makes me remember that wasn't the case everywhere, not just when I was growing up, but in the 50s, 60s, when he was a kid. And it's kind of one of those things that kind of a shock, but at the same time is just so integral to history and where this all is leading. I don't know. I also enjoyed the part about him ducking chores at the farm because he would much rather go to school, hiding under the porch and then bolting for the bus. I could just picture that. I could picture a kid doing that to avoid chores on the farm. 100%.
Mm-hmm. And there were, when I was writing up this synopsis, there were a couple of points that I left out. But speaking about him, hiding and then bolting for the bus, he pointed out how his father obviously that first time caught him, when he came back, and basically told him, don't ever do that again, this and that, promised severe repercussions if he did, but those repercussions never came.
He just kept doing it.
Yeah. And he said how, he felt that his dad knew that he wasn't going to stop, and I feel like the dad probably, while yes, not happy, that this is going on, but still deep down probably, a little bit, glad that, his kid is, trying to get an education, one of the other things that, I loved about this, not even, a racial instance, but just the matter of taking, this, boy who lives on a farm, dropping him in the middle of a city, never even heard of an escalator before, and now he's riding on one, all this and that. That was just that was a fun moment, and also the scene where the his aunt is buying a chicken from the market or whatever, and then
you don't have to kill him.
Yeah, yeah, and he is perfectly happy eating that chicken.
Yep.
But yeah, this was a really good chunk. It shows there's a part where he talks about how he'll never forget his librarian from elementary school, and the librarian says something about read, children, read everything you can, and that just shows how important an influential adult, not even necessarily a teacher, but how influential those types of adults are and how very necessary they are, even in 2025.
Yep.
Maybe more so, but I digress. So, any other thoughts on part 3?
Not that I can think of at the moment. I'm sure there will be something after the fact that I was like, oh yeah, but
yeah. And then you send me a voice memo and I try to just
patch it in.
Yeah. So on that note, we're about at the halfway point, probably a little over halfway. My wine is just about empty, about ready for a refill.
Sure.
All right. So hopefully if you're also ready for a refill, take this time. Through the magic of editing, when I say we'll be right back, I mean in 3 seconds. However, it's going to take you longer, so go ahead and hit pause, pour yourself another glass, and we'll see you on the other side. Not the dead side.
Dead side.
I realized that after I said it. We'll see
Sounds
you after
dark.
the break. And we are back. So we have switched out from white wine to red wine. One thing that I forgot
don't judge us for the the social faux pas.
So one thing that I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about the Niagara wine. So Love Corkscrew, they have fun names for their wines. So the Niagara wine is called Touch the Sky. And what we're about to drink, the Concord wine, is Hard Knock Life. So Concord wine, it is typically a sweet and fruity wine. It says that it's often described as having a candy-like sweetness and notes of jam. So I am so sorry, Matt. I am 2 for 2 on choosing sweet wines.
That's all right.
So I guess without further ado, let's see what Hard Knock Life tastes like.
Yeah, still sweet, but I like this one better.
Mm-hmm.
I also, an early trip that Tabitha and I took to the wineries in southern Illinois, Concord is actually a type of grape that they use for these. And if I understand it correctly, it's actually, I could be making this up, but a lot of them are found in like southern Illinois, so they use a lot of them down there for those wines. And you're right, it does have a kind of a jammy type of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still sweet, but I like this one.
Yeah, it's not as sweet as the white wine that we had. Yeah, this is definitely something that I would drink regularly, and I don't consider myself a wine aficionado. It's very similar to beer. Like, a lot of people assume that I'm a beer snob because I will rarely drink like a Bud Light or whatever. But no, it's just like, oh, this just tastes good. You want me to tell you what kind of notes? I don't know. B flat. So same kind of thing here. If you are looking for me to give you a review of this wine that you could read in Wine Aficionado, not going to happen.
Nope.
However, it's good.
Yeah.
That's my review.
I mean, that's one of those things, like, you read what it's supposed to be, what you're supposed to taste, and I'm like, okay, like, I could kind of get the pear. Like, but if you hadn't said that, I don't know that I would have picked that out. Would I have said that this is jammy if you hadn't said that? Probably not, but
yeah. So before we get back to March, Matt, tell us a little bit about Love Corkscrew.
So to talk about Love Corkscrew, I have to talk about the creator and founder. So in 2009, Krishan Lampley co-founded an art and wine bar in Chicago. It rose to prominence and garnered rave reviews. But a few short years later, she was forced to close down due to a destructive flood. Pivoting, but maintaining her drive and passion, she started a blog called Love Corkscrew. Her growing audience brought her attention to a gap in the wine world. This is a quote from her website. There's a common myth that wine has to be fancy or expensive to be good, that there are too many stiff rules about how to drink it. She seized the opportunity, and combining her blog and her experience, she began making wines. Her primary goal was to make wine that was fun, easy, and inclusive. She wanted something that was, quote, good quality, easy to understand, and easy to drink. In an industry where African American women make up 1%, Lampley launched in December of 2013 with 6 varieties. By 2022, she had sold over 1 million bottles, and as of today has crossed 2 million bottles.
Wait, when did she cross?
Yep,
1 million?
I did that math too. She started in 2013, and in 2022 sold 1 million bottles.
Wow.
And
so
as of now, she sold over 2 million bottles.
So, I mean, we're still very early in 2025. So in 2 years, wow, that is impressive.
Right? Since its introduction, she has been featured in Forbes, People, and Wine Enthusiast. She's also currently the vice president of the Association of African American Vintners. I knew I was going to butcher that. Their website, Love Corkscrew's website, features 8 different wines, both whites and reds, a Moscato, a sweet Riesling, a Sauvignon Blanc, Rosé, a Pinot Grigio, Cabernet Sauvignon, the Concord that we're drinking, and a Chardonnay.
Nice.
Yeah, and I looked, and you could order the wines through their website, and she's 100% right as far as affordability and not necessarily expensive, but good. 4 bottles was like $60.
Wow. Yeah, that's not bad.
Like $12 a bottle, and that's
Yeah.
a like relatively inexpensive bottle of wine if you look.
Yeah. Now, that said, while yes, I agree, that is a very inexpensive bottle of wine, all things considered. However, the wines that I normally drink are like $6 or $7.
Right, yeah.
And so,
$12 is a fancy bottle for us too. So
yeah. I feel like, because like I mentioned earlier, like I know that I had seen these bottles before, like, you know, for a long time. And I feel like there have been a couple of times where I have even like picked up a bottle and like thought about it, and I was like, yeah, or I could try this bottle of wine, or for half the cost get a wine that I know I like. So after this experience, who's to say? Maybe every now and then I'll fork out the extra few dollars for this.
yeah, I mean, I will admit after trying these two again, even though not being a sweet wine drinker, seeing these on the shelf, knowing roughly the price point of what she's going for, I would try the other varieties.
Yeah, definitely. So let's get back to March, part 4. So this part begins back at Congressman Lewis's office. It was time to leave for the inauguration, but he insisted on answering the mom's question about John's higher education. His mom found a newspaper clipping about the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville and convinced him to apply there. He was accepted and worked as a dishwasher. While there, he read about injustice and the people working to fix it. This led to him applying to transfer to Troy State, which was back home a few miles from his parents' house. But it was a university that did not allow black people. When he did not get a response, he wrote to Dr. King for help. He met with John and told him how he'd help John sue Troy State, but would need his parents to sign off on it. He also explained the violence that may happen if they went through with it. John talked it over with his parents. They didn't want to be involved, so John went back to Tennessee. Back in Nashville, John was attending the First Baptist Church. One night, the church welcomed Jim Lawson, who conducted a workshop on nonviolence. This led to other workshops where fellow members would try to break each other, calling each other names, spitting on each other, as a way to build up a resistance to the hate they would face. Once they felt they were ready, the Nashville student movement set their sights on department store lunch counters, where black people were not allowed to eat. This clearly is a very pivotal moment, not only in this book, but also in John Lewis's life. His mom, when she found that information about that seminary, she was working as a housekeeper, I believe.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So this is one of kind of those like serendipitous moments where, you know, if she hadn't been, you know, if she hadn't found that, you know, information while she was working, John Lewis's life could have been very different.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, you can already kind of see the glimpses of, you know, nonviolent, what's the word I'm looking for? Not really protest, but nonviolent, like resistance, I guess. Especially, you know, applying to transfer to a school, knowing full well that he would not get accepted.
Yeah.
Basically to see what would happen, you know. But, you know, let's say, so then, you know, like, goes back to his life that's in Nashville, and again, it's kind of one of those things where, you know, Jim Lawson. He was like as guest speaker. You know, if he happened to not go to that church to be a guest speaker again, this would have had a very different outcome.
Oh, absolutely.
The scene where, you know, these students are, you know, spewing obscenities at each other, you know, spitting, slapping, all that kind of stuff to get the other person to break. It was kind of hard. It was hard to read. But, you know, that's kind of one of those things. Like, as someone who has never had to, you know, experience not only the, you know, racial discrimination, but, you know, just even being somebody who hasn't had to, you know, fight on, you know, the side of people being oppressed. Maybe someday soon. But it never really occurred to me how you would have to, for all intents and purposes, practice for something like this. Because I know right now I would fold very easily.
Well, and there's the one guy that's part of their group that is in there doing their training, or is part of their training, and he flat out, he just gets up and he's walking out and he's like, I cannot do this. I cannot be nonviolent. And that was it for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what were your thoughts on this part?
Despite knowing what we're going to talk about for the last section, overall, this was probably the toughest section for me to read. Knowing that he wanted so badly go to that other school, and that Martin Luther King Jr. would help him, and that his parents said no because they didn't want the hassle of it. That was hard.
I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily that they didn't want the hassle of it. I think that, you know, whether or not John, you know, relayed what, you know, Dr. King had said or whatever, or, you know, if it's something that the parents, you know, just recognize would be coming, like, they didn't want to face the hate and possible violence against them that most likely would have happened.
No, absolutely. And hassle was essentially the wrong word. But, like, knowing that they didn't want to face that possible violence and retaliation, like, is for parents that at this point had been nothing but supportive, even if they'd faced, like, given a hard face to something, like, they had been supportive of his educational pursuits, to know that this was the line that they had to draw, even be it for the safety of themselves and their family. It was hard because, like you said, about possibly maybe being resistance, you know, soon, like, there's that time and there's that line, and, like, where kind of makes you think, where do you fall? And then it kind of snowballs into them practicing being nonviolent. And again, another one of those points where you knew some of the history of these items, but you didn't know some of the background. And I never, ever, ever thought about these groups practicing being verbally assaulted, spit on, beverages dumped on them. I never thought about them practicing that to restrain themselves for nonviolence. And I know that it was done in a group setting. I know that it was done for a good purpose, but at the same time, like, that's got to be incredibly difficult both to do, to be part of, but also to, like, be on the giving end of that.
Yeah, for sure. Me being the chaotic goblin that I can be sometimes, though, I would have to wonder, like, if I were in that situation, not gonna lie, especially in a group setting where, we all know that this is for the, for the better cause or whatever. Would I maybe take out some of my aggression, take that out on one of my fellow protesters? I don't know, maybe. But would also then welcome that aggression back. Obviously, as long as, I didn't cross the line, whatever line, would have been drawn. But yeah, maybe, maybe dump a drink on somebody who, looked at me the wrong way one time. It's fine. We're not all friends here.
Right.
So, part 5. This is the climax of book 1. So, in their first mission, members of the Nashville student mission sat at a lunch counter and asked to speak to a manager when they were told they couldn't sit there. Once the manager told them they couldn't be served, including the white students who were with them, they politely left. They conducted the same mission a week later. As they were planning a formal sit-in protest, other people in North Carolina had the same idea and conducted their own lunch counter sit-ins. This pushed the Nashville students to finally have their own. So, as students sat at the counter and were told they wouldn't be served, they refused to leave. This led to the waitresses close the counter. After a few hours of what John Lewis describes as an eerie quiet, white people were yelling obscenities to them, telling them to leave. Eventually, the white people wore themselves out and left. After that, the students also left, kind of claiming victory at this point, or at least for this battle. They conducted more marches and sit-ins, gaining supporters and detractors every time. This culminated at a Woolworth's, where some of the students were immediately attacked. This raged to a riot. Once the mob finally finished and left, John and some of his fellow protesters were still sitting at the lunch counter. Police finally arrived and threatened them with arrest if they didn't leave, and they were arrested. 82 protesters were arrested. Police wanted them out of the jail, so much so that they reduced the bail from $100 to just $5. No one would comply, which led to, at about 11 o'clock, the police department just letting them all go. The protesters were given unfair trials in groups and found guilty. They were to be fined $50 or given 30 days in jail. They all chose jail. After much public outcry, the mayor of Nashville ordered their release. The bombing of a fellow student's house led to mass protests in Nashville. When confronted during the protest, the mayor publicly said that lunch counters should be desegregated. However, Book 1 ends with a black father and son being met with resistance from white employees at a restaurant, showing that there's still much work left to do. I get this book is a trilogy. I get you have to end on some kind of a cliffhanger, but we just ended this book.
Yep.
Which on the surface I'm okay with, but as somebody who does not have books 2 or 3, dying a little inside. But yeah, at this point, this is probably a lot of the history that you know, even if you don't necessarily know the names. Outside of John Lewis and Jim Lawson, I probably couldn't still tell you any of the other names. This is probably the stuff that you are familiar with. And the fact that, they still, we're a united front, somebody, once they lowered the bail to $5, I'm sure one of them, if I were in that group, might have been me. That would have been like, you know what?
Here you go.
My bad. But then, to see how then they were treated with the trial, I think what they said it was groups of 12. that were
6.
6? Okay.
Half a dozen, I think.
Okay. So tried in groups of 6. That in and of itself, like, okay, I get, yeah, there's 80 some of you. However, that's not a fair trial. That is not something that constitutionally should have been allowed, but obviously a lot of things that constitutionally shouldn't have been allowed happened during this time period. But yeah, so seeing that, but then also like it's showing how like it wasn't just like a local outcry once, you know, they were found guilty and put in jail. Like this was a national outcry. You know, that finally prompted the mayor to, you know, let them go. You know, like I said, this was the climax of the book. This was, you know, a very important chapter. It was, you know, it was still one of those things where, like, even though this is the stuff that you are familiar with and that you have learned, there was still more nuance and more background that you learned from reading this. What'd you think?
Yeah, there were a lot of details in this section that I wasn't aware of as far as being part of the history. Call it ignorance. It is what it is. I did not know that there were whites that sat with them at the tables or at the counters, and were also refused because they were with the African American students. I completely oblivious. I did not know that. I knew that there were multiple sit-ins. I didn't know that they were. Some of them were coordinated in the same group. Some of them were independent. I didn't know. I really didn't know anything about the arrests and all of that situation. I mean, I knew that they were arrested, but I didn't know the bail situation and knocking down to $5, and they still didn't pay. So they eventually just like, you know what, you're our entire jail is full. We can't do this. Get out. Like I didn't know that it just literally overwhelmed the system. I also was unaware that the outcry when this happened wasn't just a local thing. I knew that it was prominent enough to garner national attention. I didn't realize that the outcry wasn't just localized. Good.
No, I was just going to point out, like, this was another thing where, like, I cut out of the synopsis, but this wasn't the only sit-in that this group conducted.
No.
You know, once they were finally, you know, once they were released from jail and everything, like, they you know, put on more protests, more marches, and more sit-ins. I cut it down for, you know, for time's sake, but yeah, like, it wasn't a one and done for these guys.
No, and I think that was, I don't know, maybe it was the way that history was taught when we were kids or in high school or what have you. I thought it was a more, what's the word? Concentrated series of events. I didn't realize it was quite as widespread, that there were as many. It's enlightening to get some of those additional details that, you know, aren't just hearsay. They are firsthand experience from John Lewis himself being an integral part of these events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this first chapter, or, you know, this first book ends at the on the very last page. There's still, like, it goes back to that cell phone at the very beginning, and it says incoming call. I need to know who called John Lewis.
You gotta read 2 and 3 to find out.
I was about to say, you're gonna read 2 and 3 before I do, so no spoilers, but just tell me if it happens. But in all seriousness, yeah, those last couple of frames when, you know, you see those angry white guys,
like that. Honestly, like, I know you said that it's a cliffhanger, and it is, but like there is so much power in that not necessarily the last panel, but like the second to last panel, where the father and son are standing there, and those angry white men are standing there with the mop in the diner. Like, there's so much emotion and so much power in that small space. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah. All right. It's time for ratings. So we are going to rate the book. We're also going to rate each of the wines on their own.
Okay.
Okay. This month, we are rating them on 1 to 10 chickens.
I can imagine the people that listen to this are going to be really irritated because we never rate them with the same item every time.
Well, of course not. It's gotta.
I mean, it's fitting for us, though.
Yeah. And it has to tie in to something, whether it's the book, whether it's the alcohol. It's got to tie in.
That's fair. That's fair.
So, March, book 1. Scale of 1 to 10 chickens. I am rating this 8 chickens. It loses points, and I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Even though I've gotten a lot better about reading black and white comics, I still would have much preferred Technicolor, like full color comics. Even though, especially like given the time frame and the seriousness of it, maybe black and white was probably the better choice. Still, from a personal level, I would have preferred full colored comics. And then also, I am going to not get a point because of the cliffhanger. Like, again, I get it, but at the same time, like, I don't know. It would have been nice to at least have like an ending to the book, if not to the story, if that makes sense. So, what about you? What do you rate it?
I think I'm going to mirror yours, the 8 out of 10. I don't have an issue with the black and white comics. I never have. I do agree that is 100% a stylistic choice for this book, for this topic, because ironically, as much as that is the issue, there are shades of gray, and it's also not the issue. So, like, it's that fact alone is kind of a stroke of brilliance. I'm with you on the cliffhanger. I think the biggest thing is that even though I know that this was done as a trilogy intentionally, all 3 books kind of done simultaneously, I do kind of wish that we had a little bit more closure story-wise at the end of book 1 before leading into book 2. Like I said, I get the cliffhanger. It pulls you through. It definitely is one of those things where, like, okay, like, I know where we started with the march. I know where we've stopped with the father and the son at the diner. We've got the sit-ins. But I almost wish that it had been ended back at the inauguration.
Yeah, 100%. 100% agree with that.
And I almost feel like that might have pulled that closure, made it feel like it was, like, even though the march is like the prologue, I felt like that kind of would have given it like a solidified ending to this book 1. I think that's really it. Like, it's kind of I'm falling back on a Tabitha trope here a little bit, where there are a lot of times where she doesn't rate nonfiction books that she reads, and I almost feel bad rating this nonfiction graphic novel for that same purpose, because it's nonfiction. It's truth. It's fact. So I'm almost more rating it based on the artistic expression and how it was put together, not so much the content and what we've learned.
Yeah. It's 100%, valid and fair.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the wine. First off, Touch the Sky, which that is the white wine. I'll have you go this first time.
That one, I'm going to go 5 out of 10 chickens. I did like it. It was just a little too sweet for me. Not in my usual wheelhouse. I don't really have anything negative to say about it other than the fact that it's just purely a preferential choice.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm going to give it... Because the more I think about it, and the more that we'll talk about the Hard Knock Life in a second, but the more that I drink that one, the more I'm thinking it's close. But I think I like to Touch the Sky more.
Okay.
It is the sweeter of the two wines for sure. Very, very drinkable. This is something that, I could sip on pretty much whenever, which is saying something because I'm not usually a white wine guy. I usually lean towards the reds. So that said, I'm going to give this one, I'm going to still say 8 chickens on this one.
Okay.
So, and because I kind of blended the two reviews together, Hard Knock Life, I'm going to knock down to 7 chickens. Like I said, it's very close. The Hard Knock Life would still happily drink this. Who knows? After you leave, I might finish it. I don't know. I might finish both. I work from home tomorrow.
Oh, all right.
But yeah, it's just like, whereas with Touch the Sky, like, I could almost chug it if I really wanted to.
Okay.
I can't chug Hard Knock Life. I cannot do it. It does just have like just a little bit of a punch at the very end, which is good, but not always what I'm looking for. So, what are your ratings?
I am going to give Hard Knock Life 7 out of 10 chickens. Honestly, I think the only reason it loses chickens, or loses feathers, I don't know.
You would have gotten ashamed for that.
I know.
Just for the record.
I know. It's a safe space here. Is because it is a sweet. Apart from being sweet, I really do like the flavor. I like I think part of it is I just like what the company is going for, what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that comes through, at least for me, more so with the red. It still gives that kind of like complexity of wine flavors that, everybody talks about.
Ooh, tannin.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
right.
Cool. What is a tannin? Tell me right now.
Right.
Put down your phone.
It gives that, but still is drinkable and accessible, which is what she's going for with this brand.
Yeah. So, all right. On that note, that wraps up this month's Comic Sans Drinks. We won't have a show next month because I am in a play, Death of a Salesman. If you're in the Springfield area, check it out. April 3rd through the 6th, Hoagland Center for the Arts. I may or may not have my lines memorized by then. I hope I do. But we do plan on having another show. Well, you might hear it late April, early May, depending on when I get around to editing it. But we do plan on recording another episode in April. We hope to see you then. If you are listening to this and you're like, hey, I really think you should read this, and while you're reading it, you should drink this, let us know. The Geek Awakens podcast at gmail.com or I don't know, wherever. You can send a carrier pigeon, I guess, if you really, really wanted to.
Sure.
Yeah. So they'll find us, right?
Maybe.
Yeah. So until then, drink responsibly.
And we'll see you in the funny pages.
That's going to do it for this episode of The Geek Awakens. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, then shoot us an email at thegeekawakenspodcast@gmail.com.
It would be a shame if you didn't follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Geek Awakens Podcast or on Blue Sky at The Geek Awakens.
Music provided and created by E. Cannon Beats.
Logo created and designed by Shay McCain.
That's it for this week. We're boldly gone.